Mm, yeah. Uh, this is a great opportunity for them to rack up some points.
Yeah.
And so you
Yep.
don't want to see any kind of a letdown, especially when the Sharks are looking so bad right now. The Ducks seem to have a pulse, but they don't seem like a great team. The Kings have had issues. Um, Anytime you're out there, your teams are looking to turn it around if it's not going their way. And we know for what a great season the Bruins had last season. They lost in a very embarrassing fashion last year in Phoenix.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
Tempe, excuse me.
That's right.
So so there's a lot that can go wrong when you think it's all set up for you to go right, and right now it's a big important time for them to build. Hopefully they'll do a lot of this team building stuff on this trip.
Pucks with Haggs is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. As always, I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work on joehaggerty.substack.com. I encourage you to get a premium membership where you can read all of my stuff on there about the Bruins and the NHL. I've also started working with the Boston Sports Journal. I will be covering the Boston Bruins for them, writing several times a week, mostly on game days. So you'll be able to find my analysis and my breakdowns for the Boston Bruins on that site with Greg Bedard, Mike Giardi, and a cavalcade of stars. And as always, we're on the Pucks with Haggs podcast here, which I believe is its 35th episode today, I think, something like that. We have Mick Colageo, a longtime friend and colleague, with us today to break down some Bruins stuff. But I also want to give a little love to our sponsors, FanDuel Sportsbook. As always, we love FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season's been in swing for weeks now, and now the NHL season is going. You can throw some wagers on hockey, prop bets, spreads, over-unders, all kinds of good stuff. So you can go there and get that all done. Even better, $200 in bonus bets when you place a $5 bet. So go to fanduel.com/Boston and kick off the NHL season now that it's here. And also America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, Factor Meals, ready in 2 minutes. Chef-made, healthy meals, delicious meals, less than 550 calories per serving. So it's exactly what you should be eating if you're looking healthy like me, and you should be getting something like that. So Factor Meals, thanks to them for sponsorship as well. Now, Mick, let's get to the business at hand here. The Boston Bruins, they've played 2 games. They're now on the West Coast, getting ready to go on a West Coast trip. Just your thoughts and analysis of what you've seen so far through the first 2 games and how much we can really sort of glean from the 2 games that we've seen thus far.
Yeah, I'm trying to not get too excited, but I do like the fact that I don't feel like they're playing that well, or at least not everybody is, and yet they look very competent. Now, there are stretches where they look like they're not able to generate pressure, territorial pressure, possession pressure. They got outshot again early, so that's happened now twice, and I'm a little concerned. The numbers, I don't look at it from the outside in. The numbers don't bother me. It's that if they're not playing Monty hockey, then they shouldn't be hemmed in and getting cycled upon. And I've seen a little more of that than I want to see. But the fact that this team is able to not play great, either as a group or as several individuals, and still come out with W's is impressive. And it shows that there's traction from last year. It's important that there's some semblance of traction going forward, whether it's the great goaltending that has come forward. We've seen that so far, the ability to maintain the defensive system and be sturdy in that. That seems to be there. There are elements that you can see it building up, and there are things to be encouraged by as well. And then there's certain guys that you want to see get going, and that's why we get some line changes happening. So
yeah, like guys like Charlie Coyle, Jake DeBrusk. I mean, even Azaka as well. Like, obviously, I think to date in the first 2 games, I agree with you. I think what we've seen out of this team is probably what we expected to see. Pretty good defense, good goaltending, 3-1, 3-2 kind of games, like tight games, empty net goals at the end, not a lot of 5-on-5 scoring. At times puck possession and offensively, not what they were last year, and not even that close to what they were last year. And I think a lot of what we've seen in the early going is the lack of, top six center play from the two guys that are trying to replace David Krejci and Patrice Bergeron. And that's to be expected. I don't think any of this is a big surprise. They've only got two, standard 5-on-5 goals that you would call even strength goals scored so far in these first two games. And Coyle, especially, I think when he gets put in these spots over a long period of time in a prominent offensive role, I think he just has a hard time consistently producing and being a line driver and showing that he can be a guy that's really gonna hold the puck, keep it in the offensive zone, keep it moving, feed or set up his teammates for goals, set up offensive chances. Like I'm much more comfortable with him in a third line center role position, whereas Jim Montgomery's alluded to a little bit. Maybe it's a little more kind of checking line where you get some offense out of them sometimes, but they're more lining up against the other team's best forward line and making sure the puck stays out of the net, and that Charlie Coyle plays a big, strong, fast 200-foot game. And, I think that's eventually, and we've talked about this a little bit multiple times, that I think that's the way it was going to go this year regardless. Eventually I think, especially
and it may flip-flop a little. It may, Poitras may go in there and may look good for 5 games, and then he may start looking a little beat up, and then they may need to switch it back. And by then maybe the heavy frenzy that the game is so fast out of the gate. Everybody's trying to outfast each other, especially since the Avalanche won the Stanley Cup a couple of years ago. Every coach seems to want to outspeed each other, out-energy each other. And I think when the game's like that at the very beginning of the season, guys like Coyle, who is naturally fast, his speed is sort of mitigated, and that takes away a huge weapon for him. So when the game's flittering around so quick like that, I don't think he gets into his groove that way. I think when everybody gets a little banged up, slow down, and people play a little more sturdy, structured game, that's when his speed begins to emerge.
And hopefully that's what happens. And hopefully that happens with DeBrusk too, who I think has not played a particularly speedy brand of hockey to start the season either. I think he's been decent on the penalty kill when he's been out there, but just 5-on-5 wise or doing anything offensively, not really noticeable in the first couple of games. I think, that will certainly play into it, but I do think eventually, like over the course of an 82 game season or over the course of a long stretch of time, I think the Bruins are going to be better off if they find somebody like Matt Poitras to play in one of those top 6 roles with one of the skill wingers like Brad Marchand. And if you have Charlie Coyle as the third line center, that gives you the depth and allows him to play sort of a little more of a two-way game than being relied on so much for offense. I think that's eventually where they're going to get going. But I agree. I think the smart move is, you have him there to spell Poitras if Poitras physically, gets worn down, hits a wall, whatever, and you can kind of yo-yo back and forth where it's not completely set. But I think their best lineup on any given night, at least from what I've seen so far, would be Poitras in a top 6 role with a guy that can finish off offensive plays, is creative like him, sort of thinks the game like he does. And then Coyle more in sort of a plow horse third line role where, he's big and strong and plays good two-way hockey and sort of checks all those boxes and isn't expected to constantly go above and beyond maybe what he's capable of on a nightly basis.
Coyle has also been trained. He's been in a groove these last several seasons to be a counterattacking player, to be a neutralizing player, to be a matchup player, to be a guy who negates. And if he comes off the ice and nobody scored, he won the shift. That's been his hockey for the last 5 years or so. When he scores a spectacular goal with that big, strong body of his, you get the feeling like, boy, why couldn't he just do this all the time? And he could be an awesome, he could be Cam Neely, Well, it doesn't work that way.
But at 30 years old, if he's not doing it, he's not capable. Like he's had, I think, 1 or maybe 2 20-goal seasons. I think it's just 1 But did he get 20 last year? He might have had it a second time last year, but it was right around, he's right in the 40 to 50 point area. Like, I don't think you're going to get much more out of him than that. Like he's 16 goals and 45 points to 50, playing really good two-way hockey, winning faceoffs, playing strong. Like, that's just who he is at this point. When a guy gets around 30 years old, I don't think you're going to see all this, like,
you're not going to see upward trajectory at that point. I mean, maybe a goaltender like Johnny Bauer or Tim Thomas, but not a centerman. And Coyle has been brilliant in his role. The Bruins are fortunate to have him. He's one of the most important players on this team. But he isn't going to be what we feel teased that he's going to be when he does something wonderful, because you look at it and say, why? There's no reason he can't. Well, technically speaking, there is no reason he can't. But in the reality of the game and how you think the game and what your role has been and all of that, it doesn't come naturally to him to play with great offensive players and be a guy whose job it is to break up the rhythm of the game. He establishes rhythm. Yeah.
And I think it's great that we're discussing this, and this is sort of a central issue or a central sort of narrative right now for a team that's 2-0 that probably didn't play the two strongest teams out of the gate, Chicago and Nashville, but performed well, certainly looked capable, and like they're going to be a playoff team like we thought, probably going to win in a different way than they did last year like we also thought, a little more defense in goaltending and less, outscoring teams and fire wagon hockey or relying on their depth to just overwhelm other teams.
And sometimes, Joe, here's another thing. Sometimes if you look at some of those games last year, a lot of them were those kinds of games. But when you have the people that can score, you have the aces in your pocket, you can flip them on the table at the right moment in the third period. And this year they don't have as much of that.
That's what I was going to say.
So the same kind of games are going to be harder to win.
Part of it was their depth just simply overwhelming other teams in the third period too. When they could throw out four lines and three of them were just attacking all the time. Like by the third period, you were just wearing them down mentally and physically, and they just lost it and the games got away from them. And that was part of their, DNA and their blueprint for winning last year. And they're just not going to be able to do that. But like either way, whatever it was, they're not going to be second in the NHL in goals scored this year like they were last year behind.
It's going to be harder for Pasta to get goals because they're gonna have an easier time focusing and eliminating him. They won't eliminate him altogether. He's always the guy has a million ways in a phone booth to get the puck out in the net. But he keep on inventing them. He's that kind of brilliant. But it's going to be harder on him physically throughout the season. They're going to put more bodies on him. They're going to be able to get away with putting more commitment toward him. And in the second key will go to Marsh, and unless Jake DeBrusk gets going, and then you'll have another.
And completely neutralizing him on the power play. I think they'll completely try to take away his one-timer and his work from shooting from the dot and force the other guys on that power play to beat them. Whether it's Charlie McAvoy not always being willing to shoot from the point, or Marchand can get a little one-on-one heavy sometimes in power play setting, and which is part of the reason way back when Claude didn't want him on the power play. And there was a lot of controversy about one of the leading goal scorers in the Bruins at that point, not being on the first power play unit. Cause I think Claude kind of felt that way about him. Like it was
trying to reinvent it out there.
Exactly.
He loves getting into one-on-ones.
Yeah, and Bergeron not being there in the bumper position, like all that stuff, I think it's going to be a test because they're definitely going to take away Pasternak first and force those other guys to beat them like Van Riemsdyk did in the second game with the net front. If they find guys that can step up like that, they're going to be okay. But they're going to have to consistently be able to step up on the man advantage and do damage to loosen up the penalty kills. But
snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Plenty of things to read into and about the first couple of games. Obviously, the special teams has been good. Pastrnak is finding ways to score. That penalty shot against Nashville was an absolute beauty. Like the way he can whip the puck, just draw it behind him, bring it back, and just whip it forward. Like goalies can't stop that. They don't know where it's going. It's an unstoppable shot, especially when you can get it like top corner right under the bar like him. So, maybe he won't have that many problems, Mick, if they just keep giving him penalty shots like that throughout the season.
Yeah, that was that was a funny thing to watch. Just a goalie being so helpless against a guy who just looks like, yeah, I don't care, boom. Yeah, but I was just thinking. I always had hoped that the NHL would get rid of the shootout and make a funnel down regular season overtime to 2-on-2 and then finally 1-on-1. And it made me realize that Brad Marchand would be like the must-see TV of 1-on-1 overtime, because he creates these situations inside a game himself anyway. When he can, he loves to just shields the puck against a player who's trying to defend him. And then find a way to somehow go forward from a still position. It blows my mind how good he is at protecting it that way. It would be a fun thing to watch. I wish they'd do it.
Any just thoughts on what you've seen transpire in the first week, Eastern Conference, Atlantic Division, things you've noticed? I loved the controversy over the last couple of days about that Kuznetsov shootout goal where he just slowed everything down to a crawl and was stick handling right in front of the goalie, and I know he's done that a couple times. That pisses off a lot of people that think it's against the spirit of the shootout. I'm not even sure there is a spirit of the shootout, but I know when I coach my 10-year-olds and we do shootouts at the end of the practice, a lot of times I have to disqualify the kids because they do that kind of stuff where they actually stop moving forward completely. And I'm like, that doesn't count. You can't do that. You got to be going north. You got to continue to move even if it's at a snail's pace. So interested to what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, Crosby in the first Winter Classic in Buffalo in what was 2008, he slowed down his shootout attempt. Not to a standstill, but he brought it down to probably about 1 mile an hour. Right. But he kept moving forward, discernibly forward. Whereas some guys aren't moving discernibly forward or making that last move where you're pulling the puck back a little bit. And is he really pulling it back? These things need to be reviewed. I hate review, but it's a necessary evil. Tuukka Rask threw his all-time tantrum based on one of these scenarios. Where a guy pulled the puck back on him and he thought the guy literally moved the puck south, and which you cannot do. So there should be enough forward motion that it should be on the player to keep the puck moving net north. Even if you're pulling it back, your forward speed on the ice, skates against the ice, should be greater than whatever pullback you did with the puck. In that regard, a breakaway in overtime, you don't have any of these restrictions, but you have it in the shootout because it's a penalty shot rule. That's how I believe about that. The other thing is my first takeaway from first neutral game I watched was it went to overtime, and I saw players just going more and more into this regrouping thing, passing it all the way down to their goaltender like a soccer match.
Yeah, Pasta does that a lot. Pastrnak.
Well, you know what? It's the rule. Yep. You can use it, so you should do it. I hate the rule. I've said I was on this hobby horse all last season, and it took me one night to get back on it this year. And I was all ready to tweet about it, and all of a sudden I had to stop in the middle of my tweet because the overtime went crazy, and suddenly it was nuts. It was scramble. It was goals, chances. It was shots, and it was what you hope overtime is. The Thunder was gone, so I didn't bother doing it, but it didn't change my opinion because it took them 2.5 minutes of the 5-minute overtime to get to that point where something happened. They got to have a backcourt rule like basketball, and the ramifications should be exactly like icing. Face off in your zone, no changes. Mm-hmm. Now the other team, the penalty is fresh troops for the opponent, and you got 3 tired guys out there. because you voluntarily took the puck out of the offensive zone. Some people want to do that thing like we were talking about in the 90s when everybody was trying to get the game better flowing back into the game. And you go over, once you enter the zone, the whole front half of the rink becomes the offensive zone once you're in it. And then other people like Bobby Smith, former North Star Canadian, wanted to put like 8-foot blue lines on the ice. And people had different ideas of how to somehow dynamically stretch the zone once it was entered in a traditional way. I don't feel like that mitigates any of this. This problem here is a backcourt problem. Just to borrow basketball terminology, they need to have a rule.
So you would create the line at center ice that you couldn't cross back over with the puck if you had it in the offensive zone, or would you go all the way to the blue line?
Yep. I'd go offensive blue line. Enter the zone. You cannot voluntarily come out of the zone with the puck. If you if you need your change,
the offensive blue line, I would do I would do the center ice. The center ice, I think, is a reasonable one. I don't
want an offside regroup. I don't want an offside regroup. I don't want an offside. I don't want an energy. 4 out of 5 of these are because you're gassed. We're gassed, so we're passing it back. Or we don't like our play. We realize we've skated ourselves into trouble. So let's just skate the puck out and regroup and try it again. I hate that. Once you're in, you're in. Play hockey. I don't like this thing where it's like if you have 2 Muhammad Alis in the ring, nobody might ever throw a punch.
Yeah. And you would do that in regulation too, not just overtime. You would have that as just a standard rule.
No.
Just in overtime?
This is just a 3-on-3 overtime.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. The 3-on-3 overtime has too many regroups, voluntary zone exits with possession.
Yep.
And it really wastes way too much of the overtime before something finally happens that causes a turnover, a chaos, or some play connects, and you finally get the magic bullet that gives the game a chance to end.
No, I
agree. That in OT or regular season OT.
I agree because I think you're right. I think a lot of overtime has become keep away. It really has, where if you've got the puck, you're just playing keep away from the other team until the right opportunity presents itself, and it turns into that. Like, possession is everything in 3-on-3 overtime, because once you get it, it's hard to get it back from them if they want to play that way. And they
regular season point is in your pocket. You're playing 3-on-3 hockey. You can't lose that point. This is the ultimate proof that coaches care more about losing, about defending than offense. And there's nothing they can ever do that will take that away. They will always feel that way. They will always coach for their job. They will always coach not to lose.
I'm willing to allow, I would change it to the center ice line, I think. I would allow them to come out of their offensive zone at the blue line to regroup within that part of the neutral zone. Between the blue line, offensive blue line, and center ice. But like the stuff that you're talking about, where they go way all the way in the other end, where they throw it back to the goalie, like all that stuff, I would want to get rid of. I
don't know if there's that big a difference between what you would allow and what. Because what they could always do is, do the center ice regroup, have a very aggressive change. Right now, the changes are made so casually.
Yeah.
But they could make them much more aggressively. They could systematize them. They could practice them, and they could do the neutral zone regroup. They don't have to go back to the goalie or to their own end of the rink. They only do it because they can, and that's just more and more increments built upon as pressure's brought.
But I think
the puck back.
Yeah, but I think it gives them less room to operate if you do it that way. And there's going to be more mistakes made if they're trying to fool around in there. So that might just incentivize them.
There'll be more change in possessions, but there'll be safe change possessions because those teams, when they have to get in trouble, as long as they got the tag up rule, so people can still be in the zone. You can have forward in the zone. And if I'm out trying to do the regroup and he can't get there and there's pressure, I flip it down and we do the change. And now we're setting up in the neutral zone and you're coming out with a puck.
Yeah.
So
but like I said,
possession, but it's safe.
Yeah. I think that might incentivize them to not do it as much if they have less room to operate in that smaller space between the blue line and the center line. But who knows? Like, a lot of those things you don't actually understand what the law of unintended consequences or how things are going to work until you actually see it in play and execution. And, you start figuring out loopholes or ways to get around it, or it does change the behavior that they have. But I agree with you in general.
Well, what you just said is the biggest thing.
Yeah,
And
the keep away.
that's like all the time. This is what happens with every rule change they ever make. They want a certain desired outcome. Let's allow the 2-line
And they don't
pass.
get it.
Okay, so what did they get? What they got was an icing tip pass at the opponent's blue line instead of at center ice.
Right.
And you have that stick they're laying there that mitigates icing, and you have the puck going up and down the ice more aggressively, and it also kind of stretched the gap, and teams learned how to like drop one side of the gap but not the other side so that you could still defend the middle of the rink, and so it got more complicated, but it didn't lead to all these Swedish torpedo plays that people said it was going to. There was a lot of stuff that was there at the very beginning of the 05-06 season that by the 6-month mark of the season before the trade deadline, you can't make those plays anymore. Coaches always find a way to defend. They figure these things out, and things that you can't decide. So we took some of the best players in the world and had them play 2 periods of hockey with this new rule, and they loved it. That tells me nothing. 6 months of regular hockey tells me a lot, because strategies emerge, competition decides. One of the things that pissed me off was at the end of the 04 season, the NHL went on lockout and did all the rule changes when they came back. But that final between Tampa and Calgary, with Tortorella and Darryl Sutter, Calgary was playing a tough, aggressive style, a physical, aggressive style. Tortorella was playing an offensive style. And even though we had horses like Tim Taylor and Dave Andrechuk at that point of his career playing gummy hockey, this was really an aggressive series, unlike the prior year. This was a really aggressive offensive series. And I would love to have seen the NHL copycat that under the old rules. We never got to see what would have happened.
Yeah, I agree. But I also think, the changes they did make has changed the game significantly as far as getting rid of like slow defensemen that can't skate and we're just like destroying people in front of their net, hooking, holding, obstructing, whatever, like all that stuff. It's allowed for smaller, faster defensemen, smaller, faster players to, come in and make it a much faster, more skill oriented game while still having some of the toughness. But like, I know what you're saying, but I think there's also a flip side where those rules changes opened up a lot of, what we're seeing with Cale Makar, Johnny Gaudreau, like guys like that maybe,
I think the stick technology did more.
Yeah, that played into it too. But 20 years ago, you didn't see Torrey Krug in the NHL. 30 years ago, you didn't see Torrey Krug in the NHL.
Enforcement standards played a big role.
Yep.
But I also think we still have that dynamic and we're seeing it this year.
Mick, I still remember when we were covering that team and Paul Mara would be complaining about you couldn't obstruct anymore in the new NHL rules coming out of the lockout, like when he was playing for the Bruins. Was like the nightly thing, was the complaint about how they're calling the game differently now. And it was tough for defensemen like him to adjust because there's a lot of things they couldn't do anymore. They were going to get called for penalties. So like it's interesting. But
both hands on your stick and it's level and the hand is and your stick is in the hands of the opponent. Yeah. We don't care if you're even making contact. As soon as you are at the scene of that crime in that position, you're going to the box. And that was the rule.
Exactly.
And even we still see remnants of that as every new season starts, including now.
Yep. Last year there was a lot of focus on the cross-checking for sure. To start the year, and you saw a lot more of it called than in years past. And there's always a new thing that they're focused on. Like that.
Right. There's always a pet penalty. And the thing that scares me about the pet penalty, remember when Jared Tenorti was in Pittsburgh a few seasons ago playing for the Bruins and he got wrecked? Who was their forward that got that ran him over from and then wound up playing for Seattle?
Yeah, I remember. I can't remember who was. The Providence kid. With the crazy eyes. I forget his name.
Right. Now he went crazy bitching at the refs when he was thrown out of that game or got a major. If you looked at the end zone replay of that, he jumped off the boards in a sprint and went straight across the ice and absolutely murdered Tenorti on the sideboards as he came up with the puck, and then was arguing that he did nothing wrong. And that's because he was charging. Charging has been a rule forever in hockey, and he just showed the textbook charge. And the fact that he was of a mind to think that what's wrong with what I did, it shows how much the pet penalty has been so emphasized that the rest of the rule book gets forgotten.
Well, charging gets forgotten because you never see it called. I see maybe once or twice a year, maybe max, covering an NHL team and watching every single game. But all right, let's move on to let's move on to another topic here. Danton Heinen still with the team on a tryout, practicing with the team, not on the roster, not playing. We've seen this happen. There's some people that really don't know what they're talking about on Twitter, saying, "Oh, this is unprecedented. This is so strange." It's really not. I've seen this happen before, where players go into the season on tryouts. It happened with Jay Pandolfo in 2013, where he went into the season on a tryout with the Bruins and ended up not signing until I think the 11th or 12th game of the season. He finally signed a contract and was part of the roster, but there was a month where he was basically in the same situation that Heinen's in, where he's just practicing, trying out, sort of biding his time until they signed him to an actual deal. So this definitely does happen. My sense is that he is hanging around and he is here while the 9-game look-see for Matt Patra is going on. And, they'll make a determination on him once they've gone through the 9 games, and they have to make the decision on Matt Patra about full-time NHL or going back to golf. And I don't see any reason why Matt Patra would go back to junior at this point. We'll see what happens in the next handful of games. And then, maybe he stays, maybe this closes the door for him, and Patra staying costs him a roster spot. I don't know, exactly how that's going to play out, but I do feel like the two things are linked, because they had every intention of signing Heinen and him being part of this team. And then they, lo and behold, had this kid surprise them. And maybe that took his roster spot, at least, at this point. Maybe once that happens, he signs a deal and he goes down to Providence, or he makes a determination he wants to go somewhere else and get, an NHL look, which is going to be hard to do, at this point with the season a month in. But your sense of what's going on with Danton Heinen, if you think he ends up making this team or signing a contract, and sort of this situation as it plays out.
Yeah, and there's nothing keeping him from signing with any NHL team.
He can sign anywhere in the NHL right now. So anybody who would guarantee him, even an AHL contract, he could sign if he
somebody did that yesterday. There was another player in this situation who was doing what Heinen's doing. I think a defenseman who just signed an American League contract.
Yeah, and if you thought you had a better opportunity to maybe get up to the NHL with another team, it would make all the sense in the world to do that. And he's free to sign with anybody that he wants to. Any veteran is when they're on a PTO.
Right, and right now, we haven't had the wheat and the chaff really identify themselves yet. The teams that have started out poorly still believe in themselves and are going to try to get their act together over these next couple of weeks. And if maybe, we get 10 games in or something and somebody's still sucking wind, then, then when we get those emails from Jimmy Shapiro, the odds on who's the first coach who's going to get fired, then you'll see that name shoot up the ranks. But so I think for Heinen, this is going to have to be a very patient process. And as long as the Bruins are willing to be patient with him, hey, they had him at the gala reception the other night for the Centennial team at the Copley. So they're concluding him in all team activities. I'm assuming he traveled. I don't know that he didn't, but if he didn't, this would be the first time that he was barred from an activity that the team is going through.
I think normally the guys do not travel that are on PTOs like that. I'd have to check into that, but I don't know that Pando back in 2013 was traveling with the team.
And that was all Eastern Conference travel.
Correct.
Those are short trips, but you're making sense. What's the point of him going? I get it. But this would be the first time that Heinen is separated from the team.
It would be
staying home.
It would be. And the situation here, he knows the team, he knows the players, the front office. Jim Montgomery was his coach at Denver when he played in college. Like, this is probably the best situation for him to potentially get a look, during the season. And certainly, he's right there on the cusp of pushing onto the roster based on a good training camp and based on everything, that was said about him positively going into it. And maybe like part of it too, beyond the Patra sort of timetable is, seeing if an injury, unfortunately arrives and opens up a spot or something that, he didn't anticipate was going to be there. And that could be the impetus that ends up getting him signed to a contract as well. We all know these things happen in the NHL season over 82 games. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But it feels to me like he's playing the waiting game for a while. It's not going to be all season. It's probably only going to be a month or two. And then, both sides will eventually have to come to a decision about, does he go to Providence? Does he go try
conditioning assignment?
Hook on with another NHL team. Like, what's in the best interest of him? Because you can't go months and months without playing any NHL games and then expect that somebody's going to, sign you and drop you into a lineup. So it's
2020 Bruins.
Exactly. So I hope it works out for him. He's a good kid, a good player. Like, I think he's become a much better two-way 200-foot player. And since the last time he was here, he's certainly not going to drive a line. I don't even know if he's going to put up the kind of offensive numbers he did his first year here when he was with Riley Nash on that crackerjack third line that actually played really well. So we'll see what happens with him. But we do have Factor Meals to help us out. America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit when it does get busy, when it does get crazy, when we do need a quick meal. They fuel you up fast with flavorful and nutritious ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. Takes less than 2 minutes to cook them. They're fresh, never frozen. Meals ready in 2 minutes, like I said. They have calorie-conscious options, going upscale with some of the things they're offering now, like surf and surf meal options, roasted garlic filet mignon, and shrimp and Cajun spiced shrimp and salmon, which is like right in my wheelhouse. This is the kind of stuff I'm all about. So it's got everything for everybody. There's 34 plus chef prepared, dietitian approved weekly options for meals. You can get snacks, you can get breakfast items. Like it's a great deal. So if you want to get Factor Meals, go to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use the code Haggs50 to get 50% off of your first box. It's a great deal. I've tried it. It's fantastic. I recommend it to you. We love these ready to make meal kits, especially when we're on the go with our kids. So one more time, that's factormeals.com/Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. You won't be sorry if you go to Factor Meals. It gets the Haggs thumbs up seal of approval. Any thoughts about the West Coast trip? Anything you think you're going to learn about this team while they're on the West Coast? I certainly like Jim Montgomery, who was waxing about the benefits the other day of going on a long trip like this early in the season for team bonding purposes and to kind of get out of Dodge for a while. There's definitely that part of it. But it'll be an interesting, proving ground, as California is, even if the Sharks and the Ducks aren't particularly strong teams right now, and the Kings are pretty decent. And then they wrap up with another match with Bedard in Chicago before coming home.
Yeah. This is a great opportunity for them to rack up some points.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to see any kind of a letdown, especially when the Sharks are looking so bad right now. The Ducks seem to have a pulse, but they don't seem like a great team. The Kings have had issues. Anytime you're out there, your teams are looking to turn it around if it's not going their way. And we know for what a great season the Bruins had last season. They lost in a very embarrassing fashion last year in Phoenix. So Tempe, excuse me.
That's right.
So so there's a lot that can go wrong when you think it's all set up for you to go right. And right now it's a big important time for them to build. Hopefully they'll do a lot of this team building stuff on this trip and use this time to bond. And because this is a new dynamic, a new leadership core, and a graduated one, and so and there's a handful of guys this is their first year with the Bruins, and while they've spent a lot of time together, going back to the beginning of camp, getting away from home and being together is unlike anything else.
And looking at the Bruins schedule, I believe they have a Thursday night game somewhere. Maybe it was San Jose. And then they fly into LA after that Thursday night game. And they have no practice and no scheduled availability on Friday. So I think that is going to be primetime team bonding Thursday night when they land in LA with no practice on Friday. That'll be a fun part of the trip for the Boston Bruins, and they'll all I think get to know each other a lot better in that situation.
I don't know what they're going to do, but it'll be fun.
Yeah, it'll probably be similar to about 10 years ago when they had a game in Tampa, and then they flew to Fort Lauderdale afterwards, and then they had a day, like an optional practice the next day. And I think a bunch of the guys went to South Beach once they got there on Thursday night, and they had quote unquote food poisoning and were not able to practice on Friday the next day in Fort Lauderdale. So it's probably a good idea they cancel practice altogether, so they don't have to deal with the fictitious food poisoning and to try to fool anyone into thinking that's actually what was going on. All right. Twitter question of the week. We'll wrap it up here. I have no sponsor for this as of yet. So contact Guy Neer at CLNS Network if you want to have the Twitter question of the week sponsored on the Pucks with Haggs podcast. This is from Matt Keene _ on Twitter. I know unlikely, but wouldn't a Jeremy Swayman for Quinton Byfield trade be a perfect trade for both the Bruins and the LA Kings? Mick, your thoughts?
I understand the hockey widgetry of this. I get that. I don't think the Bruins are done fleshing out their situation with Poitras or Zacha. They know what they have in Coyle. And I think they're determined to go forward the way they are. I think a lot of people from the very beginning of the Bergeron-Krejci situation have been eager to trade a goalie and do something for this team that otherwise can't be done. And because, of course, you can get a credible backup for either one of these guys because goaltending depth is always there in pro hockey. Okay, fine. I remember back in '88 when Harry Sinden had a team that was really coming on and sick of losing to Montreal. And Jeff Courtnall was scoring 30 goals on left wing for the Bruins. And I don't think they had a 30-goal scorer since Johnny Busick. And Don Marcotte came very close one year. I think he had 29. But Court had 30 goals.
At left wing, you're talking.
Yeah. And
Gotcha.
and Harry already had Reggie Lemelin, who he got for nothing, playing a great season. And Ranford backing up Keynes at the beginning of the season. And then at the deadline, he goes and trades Court and Ranford, his goalie of the future, to Edmonton for Andy Moog, who that playoff season was the backup or the complementary goalie, the number 2 to Reggie Lemelin. Now began to get even the next year, and by 90, Moog was an elite number 1, but guess who was winning the Conn Smythe at the other end of the rink that final? Bill Ranford. So, and they had Courtnall. But what it really struck with me was Harry Sinden always felt like you can't have enough goaltending. You have to. So really, I look at this and I remember that, and I say, don't be so quick to put it all on one guy here and go forward and say, I'm going to fix my team this way by trading from my embarrassment of riches in the blue paint. I'm a little slow to that trigger, even if I like Byfield.
Yeah, two things. Obviously, I think Byfield is a talented young player, but two things. One, I think the ship has sailed on trading a goalie at all this season. I think they were looking at Winnipeg. There was obviously like some smoke to that fire about Scheifele coming to Boston and a goalie going out to Winnipeg if Connor Hellebuyck was not going to re-sign with the Winnipeg Jets. But lo and behold, Scheifele and Hellebuyck both end up signing mega deals with the Jets to stay there in Winnipeg. So, I think once that didn't materialize in the summertime, I don't think they're going to trade a goalie in mid-season. I don't think that's going to happen, especially with this team being so dependent on defense and goaltending to win right now. I think they're going to need both of those goalies at this point. The point number 2, Jeremy Swayman's not the goalie that I'm going to trade if I'm going to trade a goaltender for this Boston Bruins team. I think Jeremy Swayman is going to, and I've said this a few times, I think he's going to end up starting more games than Linus Ullmark this year. I think he is poised to take another step in being the number 1 goalie on this Boston Bruins team and a number 1 goalie in the NHL based on this season, based on what I've seen, based on him working every day at Warrior this summer and dedicating himself to strength and conditioning and technique and getting to that next level that he wants to get to. Like, I see it in that guy's eyes that he wants to be great and he wants to be a number 1 and he's working for it. And I see it with the work he does on the ice and the way that he's playing. I just have a sense that he's really going to seize control of things this year and take another step. And that is going to allow them to entertain the idea of trading Linus Ullmark, maybe in the summertime, off season, whatever. And that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. If that does happen, how Ullmark takes that. If Swayman all of a sudden starts playing more than him, and maybe Swayman starts the playoffs instead of Ullmark, that whole dynamic is going to be interesting to watch how it plays out. But if I'm the Boston Bruins and I'm going to trade one of these goalies at some point, it is going to be Linus Ullmark. It is not going to be Jeremy Swayman, even if you have something on the table where you could get a potentially good young center like Byfield, or a good young forward like Byfield, and make that trade.
Mark it down, everyone. This is the year that Lemelin Moog becomes Moog Lemelin.
By the way, I had never met Andy Moog before we did the Centennial thing. I had no idea that he was that small. Like, it is amazing to me that he was that great and that dominant when he was out there on the ice, and the size that he was. I had no idea that was what he was rolling with when he was playing those games.
You can thank media relations representative Mick Colageo for that. I saw him going by, and I'm like, Andy Moog, get over here. Get over here. He got, what? He wasn't going to stop.
Yeah.
He didn't know what was going on. And so I nabbed him, and we got to talk to him. I'm like, Andy Moog, everybody. And I think probably some of the young people there might have been, who's Andy Moog?
Yeah, so, exactly.
He was on the People's Court, one of the great episodes of the People's Court. Judge Wapner came out of retirement to judge the Andy Moog case. This was fantastic. A guy got a jersey that was purportedly game worn because Andy had signed one of the numbers, and they brought him in as an expert witness to talk about whether this was an authentic game worn Bruins sweater of his. And you could probably YouTube.
I was going to say, I'm going to have to check that on YouTube. Mick, that is all we have for this week. We got to wrap it up. Thank you very much for joining us. As always, FanDuel Sportsbook is one of our great sponsors. Get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. There's no better time to get in on the action at FanDuel than right now, with the NHL now in full swing and NFL going every single week. The app is super easy to use. You bet on spreads, player props, over-unders, so much more. Go to FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NHL season, right? And also thanks to Factor Meals, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Delicious, healthy meals ready in 2 minutes. Head to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use code Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. Mick, thank you very much for joining us. Let's see what the Bruins do on the West Coast. And everybody else, thanks for listening. We'll see you at the rink.